In this video, I'd like to talk about stress. I'd like to ask you the question, when you have high levels of stress, does it affect, does it impair your functioning? Does high levels of stress exacerbate your symptoms of grief? Because that's what I find, and I'd like to share my experiences with you regarding that. But first of all, I'm Ghazala at the Heart and Soul Cafe. If you've been here before, thank you for coming back. I'm so grateful. And if you're here for the first time, then pull up a chair. Let's talk. Stress. Is stress a useful thing? And what is stress? Well, stress is the natural body's response to things that are going on around us. We are always exposed to stress, but there's different levels of stress, isn't there? The first thing that we can think about is stress useful? Yes, in certain situations. Is stress useful anyway? Well, yes. If we don't have stress, we can call that good stress, if you like. It's referred to as a eustress. So we need a certain amount of stress to get us motivated, to get us out of bed in the morning. And if we didn't have any levels of stress, we wouldn't have any ambition to do anything. We'd be too bored. We'd be completely bored. So we need a certain amount of stress to get us going. And then there's acute stress. So what's that? Well, I can joke around with you a little bit by saying, when I was last walking down my local high street and a lion came out and started running towards me, my levels of stress went very high. That's my sympathetic nervous system. So I've got cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine, all running around, giving me messages to run in the opposite direction. Okay, so that's my sympathetic nervous system. But the thing is that when you're in that acute stress, it usually only needs to last for about 15-20 minutes, and then you calm down because you're no longer in danger for whatever reason that is. And actually, there wasn't a lion chasing after me, so that was just a joke. All right. So, but if let's say, for example, you're in that state and you're sitting at your desk, perhaps, or you're sitting on your sofa, but you're in that fight or flight state, that's when it can possibly become problematic, depending on how long these episodes last, and the frequency of them, and the intensity of them. And we can talk about that a bit later on in this video. But I'd like to share with you another category of stress, if you like, which is chronic stress. It's a more reduced amount of stress, but it goes on for a longer space of time. So I could give you an example of that. Let's say every month when your salary comes into your bank account, and you look at it and think, oh, how am I going to make ends meet? How am I going to function? How am I going to get through the month with this amount of money? It's not enough to see me through to the next salary day. And that's something that's ongoing. Okay, so you're stressed about that pretty much continuously. All right? That can have a detrimental effect on our mental health and our physical health. So stress. If you imagine a bathtub, okay, bathtub with the plug-in and the taps are on, so that the taps are on full, what's going to happen? That bathtub is going to become full up to the brim, and then it's going to start overflowing. Now, if it starts overflowing, we're sort of in trouble, because stress has an on switch because we're exposed to stress all the time, but it doesn't really have an off switch. So what we need to do is we need to find ways to deal with that stress, to reduce that stress, so that bathtub doesn't fill up and it doesn't start overflowing. Okay, so there's various ways we can do that. And the other thing, before we go into how I deal with that, we can talk about how do we recognize that we are stressed. Well, I know in myself that I feel tension in the muscles from my neck that join my shoulders. Okay, so those muscles there feel tense. They can feel tender. They can feel painful. They can be painful, and that tells me that I am stressed. Other ways are that I'm anxious. My heart's slightly faster than it normally is. I'm anxious. I'm worried about something, and it's my job then to pinpoint where is that stemming from. What is it? Is it something in my control? Is it something that's out of my control? And then depending on that, whether I can put something into place to help with that stress, whatever I'm feeling. Okay, so the first thing is to recognize that we are stressed, and it's different for everyone. It might be that you have a skin allergy, let's say, and let's say you have eczema, and you'll notice that when you're stressed, the eczema flares up, or asthma perhaps. When you're stressed, your body's stressed, either physically you're ill, or mentally you're not too good, or you're mentally stressed, and whatever symptom it is that you have, or whatever condition it is that you have, usually flares up, and it shows that you are, and it tells you that you are stressed. So the way I deal with stress is I do things like meditation. So I go off to my son's bedroom, and those of you who already know, my son sadly passed away 4 years ago. He had a sudden cardiac arrest, and I've talked about it in other videos. Do go back and have a look at those. But I do go into his room. I work from his room, and I meditate there as well. So in the morning, it's very much meditation, just being in the moment. And I know that can sometimes sound a bit tree hugging, and you think, oh, here we go. But it does help, because what it does is, and it doesn't always, it's not something that you get overnight and you think, oh, I can do this. I can just focus on my breathing and think about nothing else, because thoughts keep coming into your head, and that's how your brain works. You might be thinking, oh, I'm meditating, but then you're thinking about, oh, I've got to go shopping, and I've run out of milk, and it could be all sorts of things that you might start thinking. And the more you do it, the better you get at it, because then you start thinking, well, I've got lots of time to worry about that later, about my shopping, or laundry needs doing, or whatever it is. There's lots of things that you manage to start separating and think, oh, okay, right now I want to just focus on me being here in this moment, because this is the only moment I have. I don't have the past, and I don't know if I have, what future I have. So I've got now, and I want to be present here now. So it's like regrounding and recentering yourself. So I do that. I also do gratitude. I think about what I'm grateful for. And sometimes that's hard when you're grieving, because sometimes when you're grieving, you feel like you are, almost like a victim. Why has this happened to me? And almost like, poor me, perhaps. And sometimes you can feel like that, and that's okay, that's natural. But you can still sometimes focus in on what you are grateful for. And sometimes writing those down are good, because when you are at those low sort of times and that low moment, you can get that notebook out, and sort of see all the things that you've written down that you are grateful for. And also all the things that you're good at is a good thing as well. When you're feeling low or stressed, you sometimes can't focus in on, your qualities, your attributes, what you give to the world, what you give to your family, what you give to your friends. So, your colleagues perhaps. So it's always a good idea to write those things, positive things down, and then open that up, and then, check in on. So yeah, and other than that, I do breathing techniques, so breath work. I don't know if you've heard of Wim Hof, the Dutch athlete, but I've been practicing this breath work for a good, I would say, about 5 years. And it sort of, it includes sort of lots of, inhaling and exhaling, and then you eventually hold your breath on an exhale. So you've been breathing in and out for, a good 20 times, let's say, and then on the exhale you hold your breath. And I can sometimes now hold my breath for over 3 minutes, which is, a good achievement. And I can actually feel the stress when I sort of then take my breath in again. I can actually feel that stress releasing. And the way I feel that is you actually feel heat from your stomach area, from your core, going down your legs. So you actually feel the stress release. The other thing that I do is I do cold exposure. So, and I do that in the form of cold showers. So, and I was one that could never stand the cold before doing this. So you might think, oh, I couldn't do that. Well, that's exactly what I thought until I started doing the breathing and I started slowly introducing myself to the cold. So what that does is you put yourself in a stressful situation by being in the cold. And then after you're breathing, because you've gone like that with your breathing, and then once you start calming down and bring your breath back to sort of normal, you then have, kicked in your parasympathetic nervous system, your, rest and digest while being in a stressful situation. And it really helps release stress for me. I find that in a stressful situation, I might be the most, laid back, relaxed person in the room, while everyone's sort of a little bit frantic or a little bit, yeah. So it depends on, obviously it depends on the situation, because you wouldn't see me relax if the house was on fire, let's say. But yeah, in most situations I can be quite relaxed compared to others. So those are things that I do. The other way to look at it as well is if you imagine everyone has a stress container. Okay, so we've all got a container in us. So a little bit like the bathtub, but we've all got this internal stress container. And everyone's stress container is different because we've experienced different things, and the way we've taken on those experiences are different. So, you might be, I'm one sibling of 4. I have 3 elder brothers. The way, and any experience that might have, any event that might have occurred in our childhood, perhaps, the way I've perceived it and the way I carry it might be completely different to how my elder brother perceived it and carried it. Right? So we can hold things in our stress container, and some of these things can be traumatic. Some of these things can be toxic. Some of these things can be adverse childhood experiences, ACEs perhaps, so things that have happened in our childhood that we're sort of holding on to. That's more of a fixated kind of stress in our container. And if we have those fixated kind of stresses in our container, that reduces the rest of the capacity in our stress container for everyday stresses that go on. And what kind of everyday stresses do we have? Well, it might be things like things such as, traffic. So you're driving into work, you're getting late, you're stuck in traffic, and it's out of your control. You're going to be late, and what does that mean? That's going to have consequences. Someone cuts you up, and that might stress you. It could be things like, for example, you're preparing breakfast and you've opened up the refrigerator and you've got some eggs out and you've dropped them on the floor. And, this is something that's, quite trivial in the whole scheme of things. If you put things into perspective with what goes on in the world, dropping some eggs isn't that a big of a thing. But at that moment you might feel, so again, it's those stress levels, coming higher and higher. And then, it could be that you've come to your brim because you've not dealt with, releasing stress. So remember, stress has an on switch, it doesn't have an off switch. So you have to find ways of releasing that stress. It might mean that you sort of blow up, or you shout, or you take it out, take your anger and frustrations out on somebody who didn't actually deserve it, who just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. And maybe all they did was ask you, what's for dinner this evening? And you think, oh, and you sort of blow up. And that is really when you're not dealing with your stress levels. You're not actually addressing that you are stressed, recognizing it. And if you are recognizing it, you're not actually doing anything about it. So we need to do that. So I've shared some of the things that I do. I do breath work and cold therapy, meditation. I also need to give quality time, have quality time with my family, my loved ones. That's important. Doing things that give me joy, spending time out in nature, that's quite important. And sometimes if you haven't been out for days doing YouTubing like me, you sometimes then feel that, I need to get out and I need to go out for a walk, rather than, I need to be out in the greenery. And it could be other things. It could be spending some time with your friends, people that get you, people that you can share with, people that are on the same sort of wavelength, people that bring you up, not bring you down, because there's plenty of people that bring you down. And when you're stressed, you don't want to spend time with negative people that bring you down, because that will make things exacerbate your symptoms even more. And what I find is, another thing that I find is, my symptoms of grief are exacerbated if I am stressed. Now, I can't control the fact that I'm grieving. That is fact. I'm on this bereavement road for the rest of my life. Fact. I can't control that. That's out of my control. But what I can control is what kind of journey I'm having, what kind of journey I'm having on that bereavement road, and the extent of my symptoms of grief. Okay, by putting things into place that will help me function, help me move forward with, rather than stop me. And it's not obviously a case of moving on from, because we know, those of us who are grieving, we know that it's not a matter of moving on from. You never get over what it is that you've lost. You move forward with. And then it's not to forget also that grief, comes in different forms and is on different levels. It's not just grief. Grief doesn't happen just, the only time you experience grief is at a loss of a loved one. Grief can happen if, for example, you lose your job. You are grieving that loss of work, and everything that brings with it. Your independence, your sense of value, your get up and go, something that gives you focus and a direction in life. And if that's gone, you can be grieving that loss. Divorce can also bring grief on as well, grief symptoms, because it's an end of something. It's the death of something that once was. So there's also, losing a pet, and someone who doesn't have a pet might not understand that, possibly, but I do understand. I can empathize to the extent that it meant so much to them, and I can empathize on that basis because I experienced grief. All right. So back to stress. How can we? Other things that we can do to help with our stress levels is, doing mindful techniques. And there's lots and lots of apps nowadays on YouTube. Lots of free apps like Headspace, like Mind, Calm. So there's lots of free apps that you can get and download onto your phone and try those. Things like I tend to go to box breathing quite a lot, and I don't know if I've shared in another video box breathing, but let's have a go at one. If you imagine a box up in the air, okay, so you imagine a box. What you do is you inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, and then hold for 4 seconds. And then you repeat that. You put that on repeat, 3 times, 4 times. And what that does is helps calm you down. Okay, so that's a good thing to practice. There's also 4-7-8 breathing. That's when you inhale for 4, hold for 7, and exhale for 8, and that helps sort of regulate your breathing if you do feel that you're a little bit on edge, and it helps calm you down. You might be also, it's just come to mind, and I haven't really made a note of this, but caffeine is something that can exacerbate symptoms of stress as well. So if you've got a slightly sort of high heartbeat, I found that as well. If I've drunk caffeinated coffee, it will make my heartbeat go even faster, and I'll be even more on edge, as if I'm standing outside an interview room, ready, almost, someone's going to come out and call me, and I'm there, for a big interview for a big, organization. So I'm feeling like that, and I might be quite, sitting at home on my, sofa, not doing very much of anything. So caffeine is something as well. Energy drinks, they have a lot of caffeine in. So you can be mindful about that as well. If you are feeling a little bit, on edge and jittery, agitated and not being able to relax, then you could look at, are you taking quite a lot of caffeine in? And is that making symptoms, worse? So, that's another thing you could think about. So yeah, there's lots of ideas, lots of apps that you can try, and not everything, not something that works for me doesn't necessarily work for you. Something that works for you doesn't necessarily work for someone else in your family or your friends, perhaps. What you have to do is try things. And, sometimes just doing some light exercising releases your stress. Absolutely. Because if you've got lots of cortisol and lots of other stress hormones, if you go running around the block a couple of times, that's actually going to relieve some of that hormonal, build up, and actually help to, relax you. And obviously, you also secrete things like endorphins, and things like that. And contact, just giving someone a hug, oxytocin, it will also, make you feel happier and relax you. So sometimes, just giving your friend a hug, or your son or your daughter, or a loved one around you, can sometimes really, really help as well with your own stress levels. So those are the things I do, and with doing that, I manage to keep my symptoms of grief at a level, usually most of the time, and I know sometimes it's out of my control. Obviously it is. I do have days where I cry, and I don't want to get out of bed, and that's okay. And you have to give yourself some slack, and give yourself some, be good to yourself, be kind to yourself. When you are feeling that way, allow your body to go through that, because that's probably what your body is asking for and what it needs, and that's okay. Just as long as it's not something that goes on and on and on. And if you are, as I said earlier on, in that acute stress, state for long periods of time, then it might be something more than mindful techniques or breathing techniques or spending time with, a friend, over a coffee or decaffeinated coffee. So it might be something like that you need something a little bit more, and you might need to seek professional help, maybe go to see your GP, go for some counselling perhaps. So it might be something that you need, CBT, and there's other, therapy practices that might work for you. So don't be afraid to sort of say, I'm struggling and this isn't working for me. I've tried this, I've tried that, it's not working, and I'm, maybe need something more. Be realistic about that. If it is something that you need more, well, ask for help. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of courage and strength to say, I need some help right now, and that's okay. Okay, so I hope this video was of help. If you know of anybody who is stressed in a stressful situation, share this video with them. And if you found anything that's been useful that I've discussed, then please comment, like, below, and subscribe. That will mean the world to me. My ambition with this is to build a little community where we can sort of have each other's back, and share, and then for that person who sat maybe at home feeling completely alone in their grief, it might, if it just helps that one person, that's a good job done. So that's really what I'd like to do. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for coming. Please come back again for my next video. Thank you so much. Thank you.